Hello, listeners. Welcome to Marie Lives the Horror. This is episode 20 of the series of true paranormal ghost stories. In tonight's episode, I bring you a special collaboration with a fellow narrator of the horrors that lie in the dark. Be sure to check out his channel after the episode. Link will be in the description down below. I also would like to thank all of my subscribers so far for supporting my channel and continuing to live the horror with me. So without further ado, step into my horror chamber as we live the horror together.
My parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and this led me to live in two separate homes. My father, with his newfound freedom, had multiple girlfriends, leading me to bounce around different houses over the years, so I was never in one place for too long. When I was around 7, I developed severe insomnia. I would stay up into early hours of the morning, watching reruns of Robot Chicken and Family Guy until I eventually succumbed to sleep. On one particular night, as my show played on my TV, a spider crawled across the screen. Even at 7, I was not one to leave a spider be. I couldn't rest, knowing one was in my space. I grabbed toilet paper from the bathroom, took care of the spider, and crawled back to bed. As I was starting to fall asleep, I felt a vibration from under my bed and thought nothing of it. With my eyes still closed, I could feel and hear the running of fingers, slowly moving over the metal bars under my bed. A slow thump, as if someone were walking by a fence, running their fingers over the bars. At this point, I was once again wide awake. Clearly something was under my bed, but we didn't have a cat or a dog, and there was absolutely nothing beneath my bed. So I waited, frozen in fear, hoping that I could just close my eyes and forget about what may be under my bed. But no, my hopes were not answered. This time the hand was aggressive while running the full length of my bed, causing an audible noise and shaking of the bed. I was panicking. I was 7 and absolutely not equipped to take whatever monster was waiting for me. But being the brave spider killer I was, I looked over the side of the bed. Nothing. 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 But then, to anyone's worst nightmare, there was something. It was the crown of someone's head. It slowly began moving in a non-human way, moving out from under the bed little by little, eventually exposing only the head. It was me. But when I say it was me, it wasn't either. It was ghastly. By the light of the television, I could see the knots and greasiness in the hair. The skin complexion was almost translucent, revealing dark blue veins that covered its face. The lips cracked and dried beyond repair. But the most haunting visual was its eyes. They were the palest shade of blue with a stare of 1,000 yards that has been burned permanently into my brain. I stared in utter fear. I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. What seemed like a lifetime wasn't more than 10 seconds. I screamed, absolutely screamed my head off until my dad rushed into the room. While he turned on the lights and panicked, not knowing what was going on, nor what to do, I was still frozen in fear. He didn't listen to me, said it was a dream and my imagination, as a parent would. Eventually, tucking me in once again to sleep for the night, I left the lights on and prayed to whoever was listening to keep the monster away. What had I just witnessed? The years passed, but I've never forgotten. I still sleep with the TV on. My bed isn't even a foot off the ground, and I medicate myself to sleep, all in the fear of the possibility of it returning. After 13 years, I stopped looking for answers. But after those 13 years, the answer found me. It was me.
This is my first time really posting on here, so be gentle on me, please. But I work at the prison where Ted Bundy was executed. It is very easy to find which prison, but to cover my ass, I cannot post the specific name of the prison. And I was assigned on our death row wing, aka G Wing, one of the most haunted places in the prison. To give some background to working on G Wing, or Golf Wing, G Wing used to house death row inmates as they await their executions in the prison. It is set up similarly to other wings in the prison, except a little different. The wing is divided between 3 floors and 6 rows of 17 cells each row. We no longer house death row on the wing, and the first floor is the only floor with inmates housed in cells. These inmates are open population inmates, placed on disciplinary confinement. The second floor contains 5 supermax cells. The third cell down on the right side row actually held Ted Bundy and is a supermax cell. The rest of the cells on the second floor are empty and still have TV stands. The third floor is empty as well, with regular cells. Our quarterdeck is a small 15 by 20-ish feet on the second floor, where we have a desk set up and few chairs, bathroom and break room with a fridge and microwave. The quarterdeck is where the officers chill while in between rounds and activities. The staircase that goes to all 3 floors is directly to the right of the quarterdeck, next to the front door of the wing. The wing is also generally dark, and the emptiness of the wing. Keep in mind, this wing is meant to hold over 100 inmates, and only usually holds 30-ish inmates on the first floor. It gives the wing a dead silent, foreboding feeling. Now that you understand the way the ex-death row wing is set up, I can go ahead with the stories. When I first started working the prison, I was told by many COs that G-Wing is the easiest wing to work due to you only having to walk the 2 rows on first floor, making your rounds quicker and easier. However, the trade-off is that the wing is fucking creepy, with long, dark, empty rows, flickering lights, out-of-place noises, footsteps, doors opening on their own. This wing had it all, but everyone picked it because, after all, it's the easiest wing to work. I finally worked G-Wing for the first time about a month ago, and still remember the first time I've ever dealt with something just so unexplainable. I entered the wing at around 6-ish p.m. and proceeded to do my first rounds, basically just making sure all the gates are locked, showers, closets, pipe chases, everything. After doing my round and everything was locked and all my inmates were good, me and the other COs started shooting the shit. Around 9 p.m., the first weird thing happened that made us all question it, but not really freak out. We had the second floor pipe chase open on the quarter deck, our smoke spot, and I and another unnamed CO were burning up when we heard loud clangs above us on the third floor catwalk. Keep in mind that the only way for someone to go on the third floor catwalk in the pipe chase would be to have the house keys to unlock the pipe chase, which were on my hip. We brushed it off as a rat and kept smoking and continued the shift. I'm unsure of the exact time this happened. It was after 2 a.m. and before 5 a.m. Me and the other two COs were on the quarterdeck talking when we were cut off by a long and loud creaking noise from the third floor. We all agreed that it sounded like the row gate being opened on the third, so we grabbed our flashlights, ran up the stairs, thinking that somehow an inmate from the first floor escaped and made it to the third floor without us noticing. All of which was very improbable, but it was the only logical thing we could come up with. We arrived on the third floor and immediately began checking the row gates, which were locked, and so were all the closets and cell doors, but we know we heard it. All three of us did, and we are certain it was a door or gate swinging open. We went back down to the quarter deck and quietly talked the rest of the night. My second experience actually happened recently when I was assigned to the G-Wing again, and genuinely shocked me worse than the last experience. Now, for reference, there was a cute CO assigned to the wing with myself and another CO, and me being the absolute genius I am, decided I would impress her by going to Ted Bundy's old cell and talking to him while alone. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the side 2 row with the Supermax cells until I came up to the third cell. The lights were already on in all the cells. I looked inside the cell, just checking it out and building up my confidence before yelling, "Ted Bundy, you a bitch." Right as the last word left my mouth, the cell light turned off and turned back on, and I felt like I was freezing. I quickly ran back to the quarter deck and told the others what happened, and I could tell they were each trying to figure out whether or not to believe me. Needless to say, I do not mess with Bundy anymore on that wing. Those are my 2 personal stories, but any CO that has worked that wing can tell you a thing or two. Even the inmates that are housed on the wing are terrified and always silent. I remember asking them why they are so quiet, to which one who has been in G for a while stated, "Because, sir, the police aren't the only ones we see walking down the row." And he left it at that. Another inmate who used to be on death row and housed in Ted Bundy's old cell was hearing Ted in the cell along with other voices, and tried telling the wing sergeant that he needed to be pulled out. The wing sergeant wouldn't pull him, so this inmate cut up his arms and passed out from how much blood loss he had and almost died, just so he wouldn't be in that specific cell. Other COs and myself also talk about feeling a sense of dread when walking down the empty rows, which I have also felt and seen shadows move from their peripheral view. G-Wing is the easiest wing in the building to work. I would gladly work there again, but it is one creepy ass place. I hope all of you enjoyed.
Many years ago, it must have been around 2003 or 2004, I was about 13 years old. I frequently took 2-month vacation trips during school breaks to Mexico to visit my grandmother in a farm. It is a beautiful ranch with large open fields, a large canal, and the closest neighbors would be around a mile away. It was the Semana Santa, or Holy Week, which is the week in which Jesus Christ resurrects. My grandmother asks me to accompany her to church that afternoon, talking about washing Christ's feet, and me being a stubborn 13-year-old, declined. She seemed bothered and off she went with my cousin, walking away down the long dirt road. Hours passed, the sun went down. I went outside and checked on the cattle, pigs, goats, and dogs we had, and just walked back into the house, locked the giant metal front door, and walked into the living room and sat down. I remember I was watching Big Brother on the TV, and I was living the life, man. I remember being very comfortable on a giant sofa couch. Suddenly, I heard a knock on a large window leading to a small garden my grandmother had filled with many roses and small trees with long thorns in them. It was hard to maintain since there was no way of getting in there, and it just grew wildly but looked nice. I peeked into the garden with large black window bars and nothing was there. I dismissed it, and a minute later, they knocked again. I ignored it, thinking it was just a thorn hitting the window. And then it happened again. As I reached to open the curtain, I got goosebumps, and I pushed the curtain aside and completely froze. This being had white eyes with only red pupils in the center, 3 scars on each side of the face. 3 scars on each side of the face skin, as pink as a pig's, and hair so dark I could swear it was wet or damp. It looked at me as if studying me, like if it knew I couldn't move. As it began to take its large snake-like tongue out of its mouth, I snapped out of it and ran towards my room. I closed the door and locked it, jumped on my bed and turned on the radio to maximum volume, and pretended it was just my imagination as the music went on. I could hear it pulling on my room's small window bars, screaming like a pig before the slaughter, and I passed out. Hours later, I woke up to a banging on my room's door. I got up feeling like it was someone familiar, and I unlocked my door and ran to the front door and opened it. My grandmother was about to knock on it while holding my sleeping cousin in her arms. As she was carrying my cousin into the room, I was talking to her about what happened as she placed him on the bed. She told me to shut up. She woke up my cousin and told us to pray. Confused, I prayed with her, and she told me to take a look at the wall next to my bed. There it was, an imprint of a face on a brick wall, as if you push your face on Play-Doh to leave an imprint. The next day a priest came to the farm and blessed the home where it happened. With respect, he covered up the imprint. My grandmother never mentioned the incident again, or asked me to go to church with her, but the demon at my window, I will never forget.
First coherent Reddit post, hoping to get the formatting right. Love this sub. This happened a few years ago in October 2017. I lived in a small town in a rural area. We had the only hospital for a while and all of the mental health services in our county. I worked as a psychiatric technician through a mental health service and worked graveyard shifts monitoring patients who needed one-to-one care. Typically, I worked in the ER with people in their most acute state or withdrawing from meth. It was always meth. However, toward the end of my time in that town, the mental health service I worked for contracted with the hospital and created a wing for psychiatric care. We would still have to transport patients across the state or to the next state over, closer metro area, for long-term hospitalization. But the ER was getting irritated as we sometimes have to hold patients there for 3 or more days before we could find a place to take them. When you walked into the ward, you faced a hallway with 3 rooms on each side and a door to the outside. To your direct right, there was a living room-like area. The 2 rooms closest to the outside door were being used as an office and a break room with snacks. The night before the incident at hand was my first night working on the ward, the first night it opened. I was working with a very young but lucid and intelligent patient who I'd been working with for a few days. She told me she felt very weird energy in the room, and I personally was seeing orbs here and there. I chalked it up to being in an old hospital at night. Plus, my town was known for being paranormal. Hell, my own house was haunted too. It was what it was, but it certainly felt heavy in that ward. Even the populated and well-lit ER usually felt creepy, and this was something else. The next night, I was working with another young girl. She was lucid. When I got to work, I left myself in through a door near the ward and ensured it was locked behind me. Shift change went smoothly, and then it was only me and the girl on the ward. We were separated from the rest of the hospital staff by several hallways of empty day-use offices. If I needed help, I was to call the social worker on call. The girl didn't want to go to sleep and refused to sleep in her room. She wanted to stay in the living room area. She had been there the night before too and told me she had felt scared in her room. She and the other patient had no communication, and she had a different person monitoring her the night before. I acquiesced and agreed that we could spend the night in the living room. Shortly after I arrived that night, the hallway lights went out. I attempted to turn them back on, but no such luck. I shrugged it off as a poor wiring in an old hospital, in a ward that hadn't been used in a long time. I made a note about it and went back to playing our board game. A few hours in, as this kid really did not want to sleep, she and I went to the break room in the back of the ward to get a snack. In the corner behind the door, there was an IKEA-type table with the screws and small parts sitting on top of it. I left the light on in the room to illuminate the part of the hallway I couldn't see as easily without the hallway lights. We played some more and then watched some Disney Channel. I hear some loud banging and noise, but it seemed to be coming from the vents, and I thought, okay, the AC/heat is old too. I eventually turn off the TV and tell the patient to go to sleep. She again insists on sleeping in the living room, which I was okay with. We were pretty casual with patient requests if their safety wouldn't be affected, For a little while, I just chilled on my phone on a chair. When I knew she was solidly asleep, I decided to get a snack from the break room. The patient was out cold and was not there for suicide/self-harm, so I figured I could make a quick dash for a snack safely. I began to get a feeling of dread as I approached the break room. And when I made it, I realized the light was off. My heart was beating out of my chest as I looked in. The IKEA table had been moved from the corner of the room to the middle. It was upside down and the parts had flown everywhere. There was no way any that could have happened by accident. I sprinted back to the patient who was still asleep. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to sound crazy. I was the lead technician. I had a good reputation at my work. Still, though, I knew I had to call the social worker on call. It was 4 a.m. at this point. She came down and observed the table and the broken lights. I could tell she was scared. She called the police, who deducted that the unit was completely locked down, and no one would have been able to get in or out, except through the door leaning inwards to the hospital, which was in my line of vision the entire time, and remained unopened until the social worker arrived. They also noted that every outside door in the day-use part of the hospital was open, wide open, except the door I'd locked behind me coming in, and the one on the ward. Those doors should have been shut and locked by the environmental staff earlier in the evening. They found no one else in the hospital that wasn't supposed to be there. Tapes were watched, and it showed the table in the corner. The footage then glitched and eventually showed the table in the middle of the room. The patient had never left my sight, except when I discovered the flipped table as she slept. I even had to stand outside of the bathroom door, with it partially open when she needed to use it. She was also very small, and couldn't have flipped the table even if she managed to get out of my sight for that long. The cops had zero idea what to make of it. The doors, the glitched footage, the fact that the ward was locked down. My boss and the big boss came as morning dawned and checked everything out. Nothing was ever said about the incident again. I asked my mom if she'd heard anything as she worked for the company as well, and she said whenever the incident was brought up, it was immediately dismissed. The patient was unharmed and oblivious. She slept through it all, even the cops stomping around. She woke up the next person's shift and went on to somewhere else. I never worked in that ward again. I was needed for transport monitoring, helping people get to the out-of-state hospital, in the ER for patients too unstable yet to be on the ward, and peer counseling out in the community. I moved away from the town about a month after. Not for any creepy reasons, economic opportunity. I spoke to my now ex-husband after I got home, and he thought it was a poltergeist. I guess they tend to hang around young children and pregnant women, and unbeknownst to me at the time, I was newly pregnant. I've had paranormal encounters, but this one was certainly the most unsettling.
So, my whole life I've always felt like I've been haunted. I hear my name when no one is calling me. I feel like I'm being watched in the dark. I often talk in my sleep, and I've scared my friends so much doing it that they have left sleepovers or woken me up terrified. I've grown past my paranoia. but it used to be bad. I still sleep with a nightlight, but until I was 14, I couldn't go to the bathroom at night. I had to cover all my windows, and I would stay up until I passed out, keeping watch and making sure I was safe. With all that out of the way, here are a few of my stories. The first house I ever lived in wasn't very old, but it had housed 2 families before us. I only found out last year that someone had hung themselves in the attic before we moved there. My room was on the 2nd floor and was the only room in the house with access to the attic besides the garage, weirdly enough. My parents had shut off the entrance to the attic, figuring we would never need it and that it would be dangerous if I got up there, as the floor wasn't finished. I might have fallen through. From ages 4 to 9, I would periodically hear this tapping coming from right above my bed. Most nights it was soft but methodical. 4 taps, followed by a break, followed by 6 taps. Then it would stop for a bit. It never happened during the day, and would mostly stop once I woke my parents or asked it to stop. It didn't last all night. It would just wake me up and go on for 10 minutes to an hour before I could go back to sleep. I don't know what exact times it was, but I know it wasn't anywhere near 3 a.m. More likely 11 to 2. At first I assumed birds or maybe a leak and ignored it. For a while it just became normal. I got used to it and would often just use the bathroom when it woke me, then go back to sleep. But one day, I mentioned it to my dad offhandedly, and he set out to find the source of this tapping. He barricaded the attic and found a few dead birds and a nest with a single egg. The birds were not recent, nor was the egg, but there shouldn't have even been a way in for them. He threw them out and looked for water. Nothing. He couldn't find the source. This was 2 years in. By the time I was 8, he had searched 4 more times and still found nothing. He even had a friend who was a carpenter look at it. Nothing. It only deviated from its normal pattern once, 1 week before we moved out. The move was unrelated. My mum had secretly been planning to divorce my dad. No one knew about it until the day we left. But about a week before she planned to leave, I was woken up by the taps again. This time they were much quicker and louder. Bits of the popcorn ceiling fell on me, and the taps had no pattern, eventually turning into a scraping sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, then stopping. We left later that week, and I never mentioned it again. 2 years later, my dad mentioned scrapes, like an animal was in our attic. But he passed away before I could ever properly talk about the taps again with him. Then there was the man in the window. By the time I was 12, I was living with my single mother, who worked her ass off to afford our tiny, shitty home and support me and my 2 sisters. We often went to our grandparents so my mum could have a weekend to relax. My grandparents owned a small farm and home in rural Kansas. Their nearest neighbor was 4 miles away, and the nearest town or city was about 28 miles away. During this period of me going over there twice a month, I began sleeping in the guest room, while my sisters took the basement, which had a pull-out couch. I remember waking up one night to see the window slightly open, which I would never have opened, and a pale face on the other side. I didn't recognize this person, but they had blonde hair which was medium length, blood on their face, and it looked like their nose had been broken once before and had long since healed. I stared for a long time, while they just looked into my room at nothing. I blinked eventually, and they were gone. This happened a few more times before I started sleeping on the living room couch out of fear. My grandparents never really understood why I started sleeping on that uncomfortable couch. But a few years ago, they removed that window in favor of a nice wall to hang a picture on. I'll probably never know for sure who I saw, but I suspect it was one of the many people who died in car accidents on the road in front of their house. They lived right by a four-way intersection, with at least a mile of straight roads going either way, no cops for miles. The perfect road to speed on late at night and not see the truck coming out of the trees to T-bone you, who also decided to speed, so you both run into each other at 90 miles per hour. There are about 4 crashes every year and 3 to 4 deaths. I still refuse to sleep in that room. Finally, what happened last night? For context, I've been having night terrors again recently. I used to have them a lot when I was younger, but I thought I'd grown out of them. I told you that I was living with my mum for the past few years, but that's not entirely true. Before 2016, I would spend every other weekend, Tuesdays and Thursdays, with my dad. I loved him a lot, and we were pretty close in our own way. He died when I was 11 in a drunk driving accident. He got wasted and got on a motorcycle, went around a tight curve and got into the wrong lane. He died March 6th, 2016. Last night I was doing my normal thing, staying up late and watching Netflix. Around 2:40 I went to brush my teeth and tried to sleep. As I looked into my mirror, I saw him behind me in my room in his work overalls and bright green shirt, wearing his brown stocking cap. He said something. I heard his voice, but I couldn't understand it. I know it was English. He was clear and not quiet. I just didn't understand what he said. I turned around and nothing. I looked back at the mirror. Nothing. I nearly pissed myself and stayed up the rest of the night, whispering, "I love you," as I got ready to stay up all night. It's now 3:30 the next night, and nothing else has happened, and I'm quite tired, so I guess I'm going to bed now.
I just thought people may like to hear about some things I experienced at my uncle's house when staying on holiday with my family. My uncle used to have an old coach house in a secluded area by a river. From my understanding, the horse and carts would stop by and spend a night or two back in the day. I was young when I experienced it all, and my sister also experienced a lot of what I will mention now. I always used to get creeped out there. I got bad vibes and felt like I was being watched. I did not like being alone in the house or any part of it. I chalked it up to being in a new location, an unfamiliarity with being on holiday, and lack of routine, etc. I remember one night an experience seemed to last hours, although I am not sure how long it was in actuality, but it terrified me so much after that. I had to sleep in my parents' room on the floor every night after that. It started off with weird shadows on the walls, like in the shapes of animals, like a circus or something. Could have been a trick of the light, I guess. I remember shadowy bars appearing on the bedroom door, like I was in a prison cell of some kind. I remember a little girl in a red flowery dress, maybe 4 or 5 years of age, in mid-air, walking but staying on the same spot, with an orange glow in the middle of her forehead. I don't know what to make of her, but being a child, I was petrified. I also remember there was an old-style wooden dice floating around my head, but when I put my hand out to touch it, it went straight through my hand and disappeared. In the early hours of the morning, my name was written in shadows on the curtain, just as the sun was rising. I was terrified, and whenever I would go to bed after that, I would roll up my sleeping bag and go to the next room, over where my parents were sleeping for safety. This worked well for a few nights, and I slept without any problems. Then one night, I walked in as usual, and over my dad was a gray figure. I could not make out any features other than it was tall, and I assumed a man. It was bent over him as if watching him sleep. Then it went over and did the same thing to my mom. I was frozen with fear that I have never felt before. I physically couldn't move and must have been breathing really hard because my mom woke up. She asked what was wrong, and I told her without taking my eyes off the gray man, but she couldn't see him. I went into the bathroom and turned the light on so he couldn't get me. I'm not sure if the presence was good or evil. I was just a terrified child. Looking back, I think maybe it was protective. An old owner checking we were okay. But the nondescript shape was absolutely terrifying, and I have rarely felt fear like its sense, but on a few occasions. We did some research on the house and found that there was indeed a male coach house owner and a young girl who had lived there. The young girl had drowned in the nearby river. The house has since caught fire and burnt down. My uncle still lives in the house rebuilt over the original site, but has been unable to sell it, and there always seems to be loads of negative energy in the air. Apologies for the length of this experience. Hello, listeners. Thank you for listening to this special edition of True Paranormal Ghost Stories. Please be sure to check out Papa Scare's Horror Stories. His link will be in the description. If you would like to submit a story to be featured in a future episode, check the description down below and send them over to my email. Do not forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell to keep up with future episodes. I truly appreciate all of my listeners for your support so far with this series. Thank you all for living the horror with me. I am your host, Marie Lives the Horror.